Today, as we celebrate the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I invite you to join me in prayer. I know I've been changed. I know I've been changed. I know I've been changed. Angels in heaven done sign my name. Angels in heaven done sign my name. Angels in heaven done sign my name. Thank you, God. Sovereign God, we gather today asking, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? A question posed by your servant, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., more than 50 years ago, yet so relevant today. Oh God, in a time where chaos could cripple and confound community, change us, I pray. Lead us to discern the dissonance that endeavors to drown our determination. Guide us, O God, that this current chaos would disrupt our sensibilities and move us toward economic and social justice for all. Change us, O God. Let us believe anew in the power of prayer. Just as our forebearers pursued you in the 1957 prayer pilgrimage for freedom, let the fire of prayer never be extinguished within our souls. Change us, O God. Make us Bereans that contemplate what we owe democracy. Infuse us with a zeal that pursues peace and heralds your impartial love. Let us not grow to accommodate chaos at the expense of cultivating community. Thank you, O God, for your calling on the King family and their willingness to contribute so great a sacrifice. Give us their courageous consciousness and uncompromising fortitude as we live their legacy today and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Lisette. I hope we will hold those words in our heart as we hear from our president, Roelofs, with his welcoming remarks.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, even if virtually. This day is a highlight of the year for me and is especially significant at Berea College. Today we have gathered to remember Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and to honor his legacy by keeping on moving toward justice. In most years, we model that movement toward justice by marching, joining many other Americans and people around the world in celebrating the man who was born on January 15, 1929, and honoring the man who led our nation to awaken to continuing racial inequity and unanswered dreams, and receiving again the inspiration of the man's profound wisdom. This year, we cannot march physically together, So this year, like this gathering itself, our march will have to be virtual. Still, in our hearts and spirit, we march this year united in our commitment and determined to follow Martin Luther King's legacy as it propels us toward education, truth, and justice. In our country, the last few years have been chaotic, as so many of us have searched for answers and for ways to combat and to protest against recent instances of stark mistreatment of persons of color in our society. Other members of our community have reacted defensively to protests and calls for justice, with the result that there is much tension, chaos, and division in the land. To those of us old enough, the present time is reminiscent of the era of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, when riots and disorder engulfed many large American cities. We are blessed to experience less tension around race and racism at Berea College. And that's how it should be, where we have long recognized the importance of social justice and where we have long been committed to an interracial and coeducational community. Can this be a model for our nation? One certainly hopes it can. There's nothing about how we think about inclusion at Berea College that is not consistent with the Constitution of the United States and with the framework of legislation that has developed in our country over the years. In some ways, that whole structure is nearly unique to the United States of America, and the whole world looks to us for solutions, and we've let them down. The rest of the world is surely discouraged by what it has seen from us in the last 5 years. Because even with that whole legal framework on our side, still chaos in our society is being fed by individual acts of racism and by the structural racism that pervades our society. And community seems an elusive goal. It is so aptly said, no justice, no peace. Yet, community is the ultimate goal. So we Bereans take inspiration not only from the courageous leaders of the civil rights movement and the current leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also from much further back in history. We look to our founders, the Reverend John G. Fee and his supporters, who created this school and the community of Berea, founding it on the principles of racial justice and equity. Community was the goal, and it was also a tool. Black and white students lived and learned together, as did men and women. And as Reverend Fee attracted persons to live in Berea and become part of the effort, he sold them lots in the town to build their homes on, intentionally interspersing those lots between Black and white families. What a contrast to the fully segregated living arrangements that arose during Jim Crow and now are still the rule in many areas in our country. At Berea College, we are proud to say God has made of one blood all peoples of the earth. And guided by that motto, we have been engaged in a 165-year march through history. Our great commitments compel us to advocate for important values: the power of love over hate, human dignity and equality, and peace with justice. These two great companies, one started by Reverend John G. Fee and the other by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., came together 50 years ago when a whole busload of Bereans traveled to Selma, Alabama, to march with Dr. King to Montgomery to advocate for racial justice and voting rights. We have continued to gather on that road ever since as kindred spirits, and continue to do so now as justice and voting rights for all are under new attacks. Inspired by two great pastors, the Reverend John G. Fee and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., let us bring renewed attention to those inequities that Dr. King awakened us all to, and that still, alas, continue today. Let us seek the community that both devoted their whole lives to, the community that both works toward and tries its best to live out the great cause of justice for all peoples of the earth. Thank you to John Fee and Martin Luther King for their courageous leadership, and thank you all for attending our celebration today.
Thank you to our Black Music Ensemble and our Bluegrass Music Ensemble for those performances that we're happy to share with you today. I want to take some time to focus a bit on our theme as well as introduce our keynote speaker for today. So as you may have seen from the email, the theme for today is the title of Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And that title comes in part from a speech that he gave to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1967, so about a year before he was assassinated. And I just want to take a moment to share with you an excerpt from that speech, because I think it speaks to a strong direction for how we can all move forward together. So this is a quote from Dr. King here speaking. You see, what happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. Now we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And this is what we must see as we move on. Now, what has happened is that we've had it wrong and mixed up in our country. And this has led Negro Americans in the past to seek their goals through love and moral suasion devoid of power, and white Americans to seek their goals through power devoid of love and conscience. It is leading a few extremists today to advocate for Negroes the same destructive and conscienceless power that they have justly abhorred in whites. It is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality, which constitutes the major crisis of our time. And I say to you, I have also decided to stick with love, for I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. And I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about it in some circles today. And I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. For I've seen too much hate. I've seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen and too many white citizens counselors in the South to want to hate myself, because every time I see it, I know that it does something to their faces and their personalities. And I say to myself that hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to love. If you are seeking the highest good, I think you can find it through love. And the beautiful thing is that we aren't moving wrong when we do it, because John was right. God is love. He who hates does not know God, but he who loves has the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of ultimate reality. And now to introduce our keynote speaker today. Samantha Johnson is a native of Kentucky, a mother, an advocate for social change, and is actively committed to amplifying voices within marginalized spaces. As a multidisciplinary creative, her work spans experiential marketing and events, social media, public relations, and product design. Recent campaigns include work for HBO's Lovecraft Country and In Treatment, Impeachment on FX, and a Netflix global fan event featuring 30 Kentuckians in 2021. In addition to producing, Samantha works on special projects for local businesses, KY for KY, and in 2021, joined a team to launch highanxiety.org, a global SEL or social emotional learning mental health awareness campaign that grew to 216,000 Instagram followers and now lives as a permanent online resource for all. Often referred to as the plug, Samantha credits much of her success to one mantra: what is the best that could happen? Thank you and welcome, Samantha.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. I appreciate your presence on this day. I do want to call out just one thing that was not mentioned or included in my bio, is that the past 5 years of my life have been dedicated to nonprofit work and community diversity and inclusion, small business development, all of the above. And so what I will share with you today will include a lot of that experience. However, that chapter has since closed as of 2021 in my life, but I did want to give that heads up there. My son is a 9-year-old prodigy, specifically in the arts. I hope he's listening so he can hear me say that, because he researches and talks about what that means quite often. And for him, that means he plans to strive to be whatever it is he's reaching for amidst becoming the prodigy as he envisions himself. And my job as his mom is to help fuel and nurture that energy, because he and his peers alike will one day lead our future. He recently asked me if I'd ever looked up the word prodigy in the dictionary, and in busy mom, probably driving fashion, I said, yeah. But I honestly couldn't recall before last Wednesday if I'd ever actually looked up the word beyond my own understanding that I'd grown up knowing or thinking that I knew. So I did. I looked it up. And the first definition I saw, which is probably what he saw when he looked it up, read, a child prodigy is defined in psychology research literature as a person under the age of 10 who produces meaningful output in some domain to the level of an adult expert. The term is also applied more broadly to young persons who are extraordinarily talented in some field. Then I saw just yesterday a BBC article that mentioned a 9-year-old prodigy who had scored really high on a math test for his grade, although 15 and 16-year-olds typically take this test. And it hit me. The version I told myself of a supposed child prodigy only matched that of what I'd been told to believe, or fed by the media. I said it. And I can't tell you whose influence or when, but I do know that at some point I felt it was an unattainable thing or achievement. I could run down his almost 10-year-old resume, but saying that alone tells you enough. A resume, you might be asking yourself, yes. Oh, and I forgot to mention, his name is King, and yes, he is named after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he wears that as an honor. Given the fact that he's probably had more motivational speaking moments than I have and received his first Netflix check in 2021, I would say he's got the juice. But over the course of my son's life, no matter how long the list of educational wins and achievements in the arts, traditional praise toward him as an adolescent has actually been at times more harmful than helpful. Yes, even from those we love. You're so big for your age, you look like a football player. You need to play football. Boys don't make clothes or dance, and you're too old to still enjoy stuffed animals under your folding table fort or play out your wildest invincible dreams. You wouldn't believe the loved ones that won't let a 9-year-old believe in Santa Claus without laughing, and even some of the nice guys have called him drama king, or taken the more traditional and masculine deemed route of communicating, which often dismisses the prodigy lying at the core and bursting at the seams of this 9-year-old, size 10, men's shoe wearing, solid as a rock of love, Black boy full of joy surface. You don't have to look too close to see the magic. One convo with this kid and you'll want to be his adult friend, as he likes to call it. And who doesn't want to be friends with the prodigy? My point is that our traditional way of thinking and even projecting on the younger generation isn't always helpful. And I too could have easily steered him in a discouraging direction, because in my mind, we had more work to do to be considered prodigy status. But who am I to say? And imagine it took a 9-year-old to remind me first and foremost that the way I was thinking not only needed to be altered for his personal advancement, but also for my own. The truth is that even when we mean well, and I believe that most of us do, but even when we mean well, When we do things as we've always done them and hold dear to certain American traditions, there is always room for improvement. And the only way that one can conquer such a shift of the mind is to be self-aware enough to embrace change in the way we've always existed, even if it comes from young change makers instead of those who once led the charge. And children, thank goodness for children, as they have a way of doing that, they lead us to destinations which we might not explore if not for their young minds, challenging our thoughts and know-it-all adult behavior. Cheers to conscious parenting and grace. I'm here to tell you today that the kids are all right. And because they are, we have an obligation as adults, young and wiser in age, to show up, not as we were raised, because we were all failed to some degree, raised by those who were raised by those who had really backwards ways of thinking and existing. I've been watching recently the women of the movement about Emmett Till and his mother. It's so wild to me how some Black men and women of 1955 Mississippi both thought that because things had always been a certain way, they would always be that way. Even when they had living proof of new life and possibilities, yet here we are still, especially people of color, often begging and pleading for things to change in the name of race, public safety, education, and wealth. Some perspectives would argue that many of the injustices that we witness today are merely modern day lynchings. In this series, there are pivotal moments in watching the children and the young adults lead their parents toward advancement for a better quality of life, which would eventually spark the civil rights movement. Some of you were born before and during that time. You know those moments when you say life is short? It is. So we better collectively get to it, or we'll be doing the same song and dance around America forever. And maybe you don't really want change, just the good hook marketing type, you know, the kind that changes ever so often, but doesn't affect anything but capitalism, a marketing campaign. I work in marketing, it's okay, I get it. But in the name of marketing, a holiday. By now, many of you have posted your obligatory yet sanitized versions of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quotes and photos amongst the sea of chaos called social media. I would like to remind you that loving the idea of something, but hating the substance of the message makes that post hypocritical. Yes, even if it really is your favorite quote. Have you ever asked yourself what your favorite quote means beyond the words on a dated background or curated square? And this is for everybody, actually. What does it mean that it's your favorite quote? Do you like the way it rolls off your tongue, or do you have some receipts behind that January 17th acknowledgement? Let's use America's favorite quote, for example. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. When I was in 7th grade, our teacher, Mr. Richard Gray, my first Black teacher ever actually, wrote a poem about how everything Black seemed dark and was portrayed as bad. Bad guys wear black hats and black cats mean bad luck. And he went on and on. But that always stuck with me when trying to figure out racism in particularly. Do you love the things that you deem dark in your life? Or maybe even at your core, fear because of what you've politically aligned with or what your granddaddy said? What is dark to you? Is dark a Black Lives Matter protest that ends in chaos when cops are triggered by a large group chanting at their shields? So they launch the spray and spray rubber bullets. Perhaps a couch catching fire during a looting featuring oppressed people who no one seems to pay attention to until the city burns down. Is chaos the ambush on our sweet land of liberty, January 6, 2021? Or is chaos reckless thugs or college kids burning couches in the street to celebrate basketball wins in honor of the University of Kentucky? Think like a mediocre white man, they say. I think that means something like, depending on who burns the couch, justice just might prevail. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are in fact not created equal. And well, justice for all only holds true for some. Although we force our kids, Black and white alike, to pledge allegiance for justice for all every morning before starting their journey into the education gap, only to go home and be met by sometimes traditional thinking mindsets that really stifle growth more than they strengthen. We have to hold ourselves accountable as though the kids are watching, because the kids are watching. And we not only have a duty to show up for them by holding ourselves accountable, we must hold others accountable as well. Stand for something or fall for anything. And well, now is the time to stand for something. Recently, I went all new year, new me, and did a purge of accounts I was following on Instagram. And I can't begin to tell you the countless number of pages flexing diversity partnerships I came across, but notice their first and last post was from 2020, some even June 2020. Talk about not even faking it till you make it. But here's a tip. It doesn't count if you don't at least keep faking it. No, but really, the audacity to not even do it for the gram on behalf of diversity and inclusion and equal pay. I have a question. I know how some of you like to tussle, so don't fight me, but why did you stop at the Black square or calling out and naming your efforts on behalf of Black workers across America? The fight isn't over. Imagine it took a pandemic for businesses to be transparent about their hiring rate on job listings. We have to do better. And sometimes I think, just sometimes, well, can you really blame people if that's what they're doing what they've always known? Raise your hand if you found yourself ever in life quoting Einstein and his definition of insanity. If you do post Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. year after year, but you don't feel like your child should learn critical race theory, what do you think we should do as a society to inform the masses rather than have an all-out race war? What do you think Dr. King would say at age 93 today? I challenge you to ask yourself those very questions, sit with them. And if you feel threatened by either of those questions, or even think with an ounce of your existence that people of color should get over it, or leave the borders in pursuit of happiness and the American dream, then you might be a little bit part of the problem. And maybe you should archive that post today and rethink posting next year after you've done the internal work. We're not keeping a tally of whether you posted today or not, or on any holiday for that matter, I promise. We're so quick to donate to the nonprofit or jump in when it's beneficial, but what about the people who don't have that option? I can imagine it's hard. I struggle with diverse communities and getting things right, from what was once familiar to changing pronouns, just married last name swaps, foreign language pronunciations, and more like, no, really. I thought to myself once when I was frustrated and trying to get it right, is this how non-people of color feel when they genuinely want to and are actively trying to get it right, but slip up because that's how they've always done it, the traditional way? It's frustrating, I know. And so, because what else are we gonna do? I mean, treat efforts toward equity like the trip to Disney you saved for, your girls' trip, or your golf outing with the boys. Figure it out. You do with everything else. And start with the work inside first. That's always my recommendation. I'm not asking you to volunteer your time for this one day out of the month if that's not your thing. We've all seen bad 90s episodes or Black holidays where the joke, and many of you aren't laughing because there's more at stake professionally now, performatively at least. But don't worry, you've got plenty of time as February is coming in hot. It's low-key sad to be so excited for official acknowledgement of your people and history, which this country was built on. And no, a day off of work on a Monday at the beginning of the year, followed by 28 consecutive days for the culture to be openly appropriated by mega brands, and June 19th, and or your local town's African American annual festival doesn't make up for America consistently for decades turning a blind eye to the very things that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for. The media pushes the comfortable parts of King's speech, but there is truth in the sidebars, the other stuff, the uncut interviews, and more. You know how you sidebar a friend for the tea? Yeah, well, it's piping hot over here. And when you really get into it, the fact is all of us participate in the co-signing of this romanticized behavior from those who wouldn't even stand beside us on the front line of a Black Lives Matter rally. Maybe you quietly donate. Okay. Let us all be aware to not get lost in the watered down version of King's messages. In an interview, King is quoted as saying, "It's cruel to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Many of the thousands of millions have been left bootless as a result of all these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made color a stigma and something worthless and degrading." Dear Black people, you are not off the hook for that one either. In fact, you're held just as accountable for perpetuating the stigma of colorism amongst our very own people, and especially Black women. Maybe part of the problem is some of us got stuck at the highlight of segregation ending, like the game ended and we can all go home now, but it didn't. We're just now getting started. But one cannot lead in fear. Your public safety leadership cannot fear a 9-year-old Black boy who stands as tall as a preteen and has the potential to change the world, just as the admirable Dr. King did. You cannot freely quote and post if you do not from your soul know that you've never locked your door or snatched your purse or assumed the worst first because of the color of one's skin and think that gives you a pass. Do the work. When considering the theme, where do we go from here, chaos or community, I wondered, how can one truly exist without the other? Comedian, actor, and culture icon Amanda Seales recently said, "If you think I'm tough, that means you haven't given me a reason to be soft." And that's really the story for so many of us. People see a version of us that we show them because that's a version of us that's had to show up, she says. In so many instances where we felt threatened or feared for our lives because we weren't sure if a Karen might say that today our presence makes her uncomfortable. Right now might be the only time that all of us can relate to a level of discrimination, depending on where you fall on the vaccine and mask spectrums and where you live or what party you resonate most with, though nothing compares to that of a people being enslaved, trafficked, or killed for holding a toy, for standing on the sidewalk, for leaving the store, for running, for saying they can't breathe, and even for sleeping sound in their own bed. We're all tired, especially when COVID doesn't discriminate. Your color, your wealth, your neighborhood or side of town, nor your political status can protect you from catching a virus. Our world's knocked upside down from the front to the back of the line, be it traffic, a marching protest, the school car rider line, non-traditional learning, or yet another funeral procession of a lost loved one during such a time as this. Yet we march on in life and for equitable rights. The truth is, some of us have been marching since we can remember, marching for our freedom, desegregation, the right to vote. And no, many of us don't consider marching in the name of safety pins and pink hats a thing for equality. Let's not do that again. But if there was ever a time to begin, what are we waiting for? We've waved our flags in solidarity from left to right, the good ones at least, and held on to what hope we have left for the good times. We've stood our ground. Some of us found ourselves for the first time over the last 3 years, and we look like a bunch of parents and coworkers who aren't sure if we're going from, I got this, to, oh no, it's happening again. But managing to hold it together. One more year of COVID. Or just finally giving up on our Pinterest board dreams and letting it all hang out at this point. Either way, we keep marching. USA Today shared an article last week. An overwhelming majority says that the US is facing a mental health crisis. Dare anyone on here to say you aren't in therapy, haven't considered therapy, really want to stay stuck in your ways and convince yourself you don't need therapy. But one way or another, it has crossed your mind in the past 2 years, going on 3 years of a pandemic. Mental health is one of the single largest causes across disabilities in the world. Even when you dress it up, it is what it is. And especially at such a heightened period where we are standing 6 feet apart and wearing a face mask to enter any given store. It's giving stick up. Now we all wear hoodies and masks. Imagine. I read that personal growth is about evolving and is the continuous process of growing yourself to realistically achieve your greatest ability. However, it's kind of hard to do that right now without limitations. And you know why I believe that striving for better mental health can be a true catalyst for change. I believe that because As stated in my bio, I was trained to grow a social emotional learning formula-based Instagram account on behalf of High Anxiety. That is a global digital social impact account to help young people, or anyone for that matter, better manage everyday anxieties. And let me tell you, rooted in social emotional learning after helping over 200,000 people with 3.97 million engagements and offering a safe space for mental health support while demystifying getting help. On top of all of that, I can tell you that the toll it took to manage as someone sharing resources alone, but then to even have access to so many hurting people is something we should be talking about more. How can you care? The point is, we got a lot of work to do. To my brothers and sisters, people of color across America, even though mental health, advocacy, and all the above has been so taboo in our communities forever, it is never too late. The reason I believe the kids are all right and those who aren't will be is because of the resources that are provided to help them process the traumas of the world online alone. But to all of you, let the traumas of the world not stem from our hands. I believe that chaos can be a sign of hope, that people are desperately searching for community amongst their highs and their lows. Be encouraged to be the change even when it doesn't affect you. Hello, white moderates. Dr. King is quoted to have said, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that Negroes' great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Be encouraged to lead with an open mind of equitable advancement and to welcome a younger generation ready to lead and hit the ground running. I saw a photo of the Golden Girls debut and they were mid-50s, I think. They looked 70 plus compared to the 50 plus year olds today. As silly as that is, it's quite significant. When the woman advances historically, it seems as though further change eventually follows behind. Fingers crossed. And as the Black woman continues to be the highest educated group of people in the country, take your seats. If you cannot find ways to truly impact necessary change, please do not disturb. There's a video of King stating the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far as a kind of installment plan. How long will it take, do you think? Do you believe that in this lifetime you will see liberty and justice for all? And could you envision that if someone asked you to describe what that world looks like? You know what they say about making it plain, writing it down. Maybe you'll surprise yourself. And if you can't articulate that in the moment because you don't see a problem or color or whatever, maybe you'll be triggered into action. Instead of arguing over how we gatekeep Black culture for the elevation of young white pop culture, let us make the rule of each one teach one great again. But let's leave call out culture on social media in 2021, especially for the sisterhood. And believe it or not, if we thought we saw Gen Z rise up in 2020, best believe we ain't seen nothing yet. And just like with my son, I believe it's our job to help fuel and nurture the energy of any new generation, but do so without judgment, no matter how we view their state of existence, identifying, or their radical honesty. Face it, none of our families have ever benefited from family secrets. And anyway, they've already found a way to break down critical race theory on TikTok, so don't worry, your kids will get the lessons regardless. It's the World Wide Web. My kid already asked Alexa what it was, and she gave him an answer. Lesson accomplished. What are we voting on? My kid asked me and Alexa what was anxiety, because he saw a kid on a show that had it and it reminded him of himself. Everything is at their fingertips. Now, don't y'all go canceling YouTube and Amazon subscriptions. Perhaps the best change happens when nothing is in our control at all. And maybe that's the beauty in watching the chaos come to rest and new communities unfold. Just go on and do the work so you can enjoy life with your kids and your grandkids rather than make them spend the rest of their lives schooling you. And why not lean into new ways of thinking based on our experiences thus far? But remember, in taking any new approach, we mustn't lean on our own understanding based on definitions of words like prodigy that we were taught decades ago. Try Again has exhausted its run for this cycle of racial tension because of misunderstandings and failure to shift our thinking for the better. Whatever our civic frustrations are, if you're worried that reverse slavery might happen in the name of equality, don't. When we don't understand something, a way of thinking, a group of people, an object, phrase, or one another, let us be slow to react, but quick to accept that change for the better, which can only lead to a healthier and happier life. You can start by voting with your legit best interest in hand, and not because you've always done it that way. You can start by advocating in the school system and working for wages and for working wages. And if those don't fit your cup of tea, you can always ask an ally. And in 2022, you can Google how to do all of the above. But most of all, you can challenge yourself to show up beyond your favorite quote today. If a 9-year-old can do the research, alter his belief, and convince someone else to support him in the effort of accomplishing such goals, you can do the work to help make your community a better place. And if racism will always exist, in the words of Dr. King, we must never allow ourselves to become satisfied with the unattained goals. We must always maintain a kind of divine discontent. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. What's the best that could happen? Thank you.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me on. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my plea, hear my call, lead me on, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to Samantha. Thank you to everyone today joining us virtually. You know, there is a sublime similarity with the conditions in which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote his last book and the conditions in which we are discussing that very book and question here today. Where do we go from here? We know that Dr. King wrote this book, his last book, in isolation in Jamaica. He made sure not to surround himself with distractions like telephones. Today, many of us find ourselves viewing this program from our individual laptops in our own form of isolation due to the snow and ice. We did not have a march today. We did not fill our churches today for a program or pose for a huge campus photo. Today is less about performatives and more about examining our individual pace of progress, of creating that beloved community that we all love here at Berea College, and that beloved community that Dr. King referenced in almost every speech, interview, book, or paper. When we think of the civil rights movement, we can almost visualize the setting of hot summer days. However, it was Dr. King that stressed to us the importance of preparing for the summers during the wintertime. We understand that during the winter, we'll have delays. I mean, just this month, we've experienced move-in delays for our students, labor delays, and in-person classes delays. But we may not continue to delay our fight for justice and freedom. We may have a blanket of snow outside right now, but it is important for us not to fall asleep in this fight towards freedom or become stagnant in the process of strengthening our amazing community here at Berea College. Yes, it's true. We have achieved a lot of radical national social change here at Berea, but as Dr. King would tell us all, we must keep going. We can't stop. And even a college as radical and progressive as Berea, it is important for us to know that although many of us have climbed to the top of the pinnacles, we have not yet reached the mountaintop in our fight. We still have work to do, Bereans. This pandemic and winter weather is not a time for sleeping. Dr. King told us all that every society has its protectors of the status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. But today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenges of change. Make this challenge a personal one today, my friends. What can you do to learn more about systemic racism and how to contribute to true change here in Berea and beyond? I encourage everyone, students, faculty, and staff to sign up for our college's civil rights tours when offered. Here at the Black Cultural Center and the Carter G. Woodson Center, not only do we encourage you to attend our Black History Month programs, but we invite you to become collaborators and partners with us every year throughout the year. Visit our spaces of Black culture, history, and interracial education. Don't start tomorrow, start today. As Dr. King wrote in his book, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confined with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. We still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos and community. Before we ask Berea College this question as a whole and as a community, let's take today, this snow day, to ask ourselves that question as we examine this from our own humanity. The same choices still remain today. Thank you all for joining us. This concludes our virtual MLK program this morning. A special thanks to all of our Berea College community members and a special thanks to our keynote speaker, Samantha Johnson. Enjoy the snow day, but remember, don't sleep too much. Stay woke. We all have work to do.
Thank you, Christina. And Samantha has indicated that she's willing to stay on for a little bit and do some Q&A. So I know some people are leaving, but if you have a question for our keynote speaker, you can go ahead and put that in the Q&A feature, and I will read those questions off as we get some.
While we wait, just want to thank you all again for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
And your address was wonderful. Lots of good comments in the chat and lots of good thought-provoking ideas for us to chew on while we prepare for Black History Month, certainly. Okay, we have a question. What is something that you would like to say to Dr. King if you could?
Come get these people. I'm just playing. Gosh, maybe I would say thank you. And I would probably talk about the intention behind my son's name and how sometimes when you're really intentional, things work out exactly how they're supposed to. And yeah, I would probably just gloat about my kid, to be honest, and share similarities and ask a ton of questions that over the time, I keep looking for him in this series. He hadn't popped up yet that I've been watching on Hulu. So I'd have a ton of questions, but I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know an exact answer or an exact line or phrase that I might say. But I would probably throw in a joke, to be honest. I think I kind of tend to lean on my sense of humor a little bit more than not. So.
Well, and I always feel like people don't think about Dr. King, the family man, either. So I bet if you were bragging about your kid, he'd want to brag about one of his 4 too. So that's always something I think about as well. Absolutely. All right, next question. What would you love to see different this Black History Month?
Well, I would say what I have already seen, which I am excited about, is not just the mega brands, and that line came from a space, but I've noticed in the last week or so how many local folks have been picked up by mega brands in the name of Black History Month, and they have their display and their curated tagging and all. I think Target in particular is doing an amazing job with this. Their brand partnerships have been blowing me away from Lego down, but I noticed that there was a young lady also in Louisville who recently got picked up by a large brand, and I mean like mega large brand. And even though the items are small in quantity, maybe they have like 4 or 5 things or one solid sweatshirt that they're presenting on behalf of their Black owned brand. It's the fact that this mega brand is giving them the platform, but not only giving them the platform, I think the best thing that we could see beyond sharing platforms this upcoming February would be for Black creatives in particular and Black businesses to be compensated for not just inspiring the culture. And I know that there's been a lot of heat recently, as I think Forbes or Fortune, someone put out a recent study on TikTokers and creatives who were the top paid, and there's a lot of fuss in the Black community over there that none of them are listed. And that's almost impossible. It should be, at least if you go by followers and engagement. And so, even the most liberal platform, I guess, you could say, I don't know if they are or not, but there's still so much work to do. So I would say for sure paying people of color their worth and not just checking the box that we did something, and keeping that going consistently rather than it being a one and done.
Yeah, it doesn't have to just be February that you invite the Black creative to come and speak. There's a whole bunch of other times that can be accomplished.
Yeah.
All right, and we have one more here, it looks like. Says from an anonymous attendee, thank you, Samantha. Tremendous inspiration and insight. Can you share a personal experience or event when you felt, quote, the other side awoke upon interaction with you? I love your storytelling.
Awoke upon interaction with me. Yeah, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of developers over the years as I worked in the nonprofit sector. And I think that, when I first started in my role there in nonprofit, I came in so green, but I was still so corporate. And this was very far from that. And so I was still on my toes and all, I didn't want to do too much. But then as they started to groom me, these super woke non-people of color, and I started to see that oh, wait, there are people who actually care, maybe kind of, sort of. And so I let my guard down. And I jokingly said once, as I was kind of hushed, in a meeting, or, asked not to say certain things. And I started to be babysat a little bit. And I remember looking over at, these super liberal folks and saying, you made me like this, you encouraged me so much to feel like I had a voice that mattered. And then when I started to use it, you instantly started to silence it. And I then had to make a choice on whether or not I was going to like play the game or if I was just going to do me. And I chose to do me. And so I would say that from that moment on, as I would walk into the room or, sit down at the table with folks that maybe I didn't see eye to eye with, or we didn't agree on certain things around community, there was a rude awakening. Even if I just talked like this intentionally without raising my voice or without sounding like I have a deep voice, without sounding too masculine or aggressive or whatever it is, to see the anger still rise up in a person when it should be a civil conversation. So I've had many of those instances, and for the longest time, in the name of poverty or whatever they call them, the middle class now, I don't know. Because of the struggle, I didn't have a choice to leave at the time, and so there were countless times where that was a situation. I see Lachey has a question. I don't know if she got it in the question box or not, but.
So here's the question. What opportunities do you see locally for businesses to move beyond the performative Black square to really promote diversity?
I would kind of reiterate what I already said, but I think that businesses that are not Black owned in particular, are not owned by any group of color, they have good ideas. And a lot of times they're more on the right track than they think, but there's this hesitancy. And I get it, because it feels like we should leave it for the culture. If you think of it, then it's good that you were thinking about it. But if you think of it and it's too good, then you should probably leave it for the culture, because you don't want to appropriate. But if you don't say anything about it, then it feels like you didn't do anything. And I would just challenge more businesses to call out the things that you've already done. Like I said, I think that when there's a reason, a sad reason, to be showing up for people of color in particular, everyone's on the front line and ready to make their posts about what their efforts have been. But year round, I know that Kentucky for Kentucky is a brand that does a lot of work on all ends of the spectrum across the board, and really dives deep into diversity. But they're a business in particular that a lot of people don't get to see that side of them. And I look forward to working with open-minded leadership like they have currently to be able to say, let's try this another way. They've been doing the work. There are countless designers that have been of color who have designed products and whatnot for them, but they haven't maybe shared as openly as they could have, as to not seem like boastful, or as they're bragging. But I think it takes a little bit of us all letting our guard down, and people of color as well, and putting on our hat of acceptance all around, and letting one another show up in the best way possible. And maybe instead of, if we have an idea as white businesses in particular, instead of just taking off and doing it, especially if you have a limited amount of people of color, and so it doesn't fall into the lap of the only person of color or whatnot, maybe you create a group of folks that can already be invested in your brand, be it influencers of color and whatnot. And a lot of the brands that I don't really work with the brand. I do work at Delta like part-time, but I don't really work with the brand outside of them that isn't forward thinking any longer. And I'm really thankful to be in a position to have that choice to make, for sure.
Yeah, Nicole Thomas here writes, "You are awesome, Samantha. Thank you for your inspiring and courageous words. How does one book you for future keynote addresses?" If you are able to type that into the Q&A, that might be a great place to put that, or in the chat for everyone, that would be fine too. And then while you're doing that, this one I think is great, because I also am a mother of a young creative who is 12 instead of 9, but it definitely is an interesting world raising young Black boys that are more on the prodigy side than not. So what advice would you give to mothers of creatives as it relates to being an advocate of their children against the harsh traditions and practices while maintaining pride of family and community?
I threw out discipline a long time ago, and I found myself saying, I can't even discipline my kid because I'm so busy like fighting off all the other things that come at him in this world, be it things out of our control or whatnot. And so when it comes, when it's my turn to say like, please don't do that or whatnot, or maybe sometimes even like, stop, don't do that, with a sterner voice, more stern voice. I feel bad, because he is a more sensitive soul. And so and then I saw a quote yesterday from someone that I follow on behalf of conscious parenting, Miley Teal. And she said, she actually like them, what do you do to discipline in conscious parenting? Her. And she wrote, I don't. And that's I don't. I think that by allowing such an open and safe space for my kid, he says everything, he shares everything. And like, there are times when I've seen him be ready to withdraw, but it's because he doesn't want to bother me, or he doesn't think that, it's important, or I don't want to hear it, or I might be busy working, I'm on my computer. And so I've tried to, I've asked a lot of people for help in terms of like, what's some advice, even on the times that I don't really look forward to stopping and taking the time to watch the show without my laptop on my lap, like to be fully present. What has helped me the most is to just be fully present in those times, even if I have to set 15-minute alarms. And all of this advice came to me from other people. Dr. Becky Good Inside is an amazing account to follow on Instagram, Across the Border podcast, all the above, truly changed my life. And I specifically said, paused and said grace, as I talked about, thank God for conscious parenting, because it is not easy. I think about how much further we even could be had I had these resources before the last 2 years or so. But I know that I did what I thought was best, and I'm not mad about it, that's for sure. But could I have done things differently? Absolutely. The best thing that you can do is just create a space for you and your kid, away from all of the noise and all of the chaos, even if that noise and chaos sometimes comes from those closest to us. I know they say that, family is family. And then there's always the quotes that say, well, not if they're toxic. And that's maybe not always the case, but for my kid, he's in therapy. He has breathing exercises. He knows how to work his calming strategies, just from test taking anxiety to dealing with folks who do, who he is, who he does anticipate might poke at him because he can take it, because he looks like this big, tough kid. And we talk about it. He writes about it. You name it. He's on this kick of like reading his thought of the day cards and doing 3 yoga poses a day. This is all of his thing. And I do not feel like doing yoga. I don't ever really feel like doing yoga, but I did it yesterday because that's important to him, and even if it doesn't seem like it's not a big deal, those little not big deal moments really add up. And so I've just been trying to be so conscious of limiting as many of those as possible.
All right, it looks like we have our last question here. Do you have a specific objective you want to work to accomplish by the end of 2022 in your Do the Work battle?
I am really in a place in this season of my life where the work is not over and it is not done, but I am so completely exhausted from doing the work. And some of that comes from peers, people who look like me, and some of that comes from people who don't look like me. And learning to navigate those ways, and being such a public face for a nonprofit in particular, and throwing markets after markets, you name it. I am socially exhausted, if that makes sense. And so someone not too long ago said, do you still live here in Kentucky? And I was like, yeah. And then I thought I did it because I just kind of wanted to just like fade into the background. And so, on my list is to shine my light more, that's for sure. But I'm definitely in a space of focusing more on Samantha and what my personal and professional goals look like. Things have changed drastically for me in the last year. They look different. I went from barely making, no joke, less than $25,000 a year ago to knocking that out of the water. And it's not even about the money. it's really just that I didn't even realize how much I had been in such a survival mindset that I have literally been close to shedding a tear, just trying to embrace the fact that like things are different and they don't have to, life doesn't have to feel like a struggle just because someone saw my worth. And that has contributed to my own self-worth. But I have work to do internally in terms of self-worth. The world of nonprofit, especially in the heart of gentrification, is brutal, and it does not let up. And I know that I'm still very triggered. I'm self-aware enough to recognize that in terms of the work on the ground. And so my efforts are now just fueled into supporting others and their efforts and being a resource. I'm taking, bookings, but when people call, I'm like, I know somebody who can help you, and I do. I am a wealth of knowledge and a vast resource, as a friend of mine recently shared on Facebook. And I look forward to sharing in that way for the rest of the year for sure. And in the future, I'll get back. I've done the things. I thought that all the good work looked like going to Haiti and working in nonprofit, but I know that there are so many other areas. And currently I serve on the board for Central Kentucky Youth Orchestra and Distill Theater. So it's my first year. I'm excited to take that route.
Yeah. It looks like we had one question from Reverend Lisette in the chat, and it's a good closing one, so I will make this our last question. She asks, as we journey within the dynamics of chaos and community, would you provide a few suggestions on managing our mental health? Thank you for mentioning therapy.
Absolutely. So first, therapy. I actually don't have a therapist right now as much as I advocate for it, but I did. And she wasn't a fan of conscious parenting, so we didn't see eye to eye. And you got to date your therapist sometimes. And I have a hard time setting boundaries. I'm working on that the next full year. But she actually said, do you want to make this our last session? I think she just kind of got it, and thankfully, because I probably would have just sat in it, honestly. But I would say, look into therapy, and if you need support around that, there are phone resources where you don't even have to look at a person. You don't have to go into an office to meet a person in this age of remote learning and work. There is telehealth, and that has been such a blessing, I feel like, to so many of us and so many of my friends I know personally. And I would say, between a friend of mine, at one point, she couldn't afford extra services to go see a therapist, and her healthcare didn't cover it. And so she just got on YouTube. My kid sleeps to shower sounds every night from Alexa. You name it. There are a vast amount of resources out there. And as I mentioned, high anxiety, that's high, like HI, I'm going to put it in the chat. Highanxiety.org is an organization that I worked for, and it was funded by Melinda Gates. That after that funding was exhausted, the organization moved solely online to highanxiety.org, and it is a global resource for all. So if you are looking for anyone to talk to in the country, there's probably a resource there. And if you are a social media manager who is more interested in learning more about social emotional learning resources, even, or a teacher, even, because I'm like, sometimes my kid comes home and I'm thinking, I wish teachers were better versed in social emotional learning, but they aren't, and they don't get paid enough to be, so neither here nor there right now. But I would check out that resource for sure, and there are other ones there that you can pivot to off of that. But take time for yourself. Mel Robbins has really blown up. She recently did she's been blown up, I think, but she did in the name of the Black community. She had a Breakfast Club interview on the radio, and I heard her, and I was so inspired. And then all of a sudden, she's all over my social media. But she's a great resource to follow. Very motivational, very realistic. And Miley Teal. Those are I would find folks that aren't really mentors, but that can be kind of like virtual mentors when you just need to check in. We don't really want to call somebody and explain everything and talk to them about everything, but you still need a word. I can almost always tap into one of those accounts and be encouraged and uplifted. And there are all kinds out there, whatever floats your boat. And I would prioritize self-care. They used to say happy wife, happy life, but happy mom, happy kids. Kids can tell when you're frustrated from babies on up. Even if you just had a bad day, sometimes I have to say, you know what, it's not you, it's me. I've had a bad day. But to get to that point of being self-aware enough to even feel like your kids deserve that, or where you're even in a place to offer that to them, self-care is most important. And I think that if our kids see us take the opportunities to prioritize those things, then they will too in the future. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. This has been a wonderful journey together today. And thank you all to our attendees and those that could hang on with us until, for a couple extra minutes. I very much appreciate that. So again, for those that asked, we are recording this. I will be posting the recording on our Carter G. Woodson Center YouTube page. So feel free to check that out later, share with your friends, and go out and do what is meaningful for you today to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King. And if you're around at 3 o'clock, I highly recommend you join our convocation this afternoon featuring Sesame Street performer Chris Hayes. Thank you all and have a good day.